Hello, my name is Paula Deloff, and I'm the academic dean over the English department at Thomas Jefferson High School. And this is part one of a two-part video where I'm going to talk about the writing section of the multiple choice. So as you can see from the title slide, that I consider this to be a little bit more of a deep dive. So there is a video on the Canvas course that is a bit of a more of an all overview. If you don't know anything about the TSI, that's a great place to start. So we're going to talk specifically, we're talking about the first 30 multiple choice questions, and we're talking about questions 16 through 30, because questions 1 through 15 are reading, and there's a separate few videos that talk about those questions in a little bit more depth. So we're specifically talking about the writing multiple choice questions 16 through 30. Okay, there's my contact information if you need to reach out to me. If you have any questions or any want some help with something, please do not hesitate to reach out. Okay, so the writing multiple choice questions, again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, it's 16 through 30 on the CRC section of the task. That's the very first section that everybody takes. There's two types of questions. There's essay revision and editing, and you'll see samples of these questions, and you'll see the types of questions students are inclined to get. And then I also share with you some of the resources. So today's video is really going to focus on the first kind, which is the essay revision and editing. And those are going to be the most similar to the STAR test. So if you've ever prepped a student for STAR, this is very similar to the first two types of questions that they have on or the first two passages that they have on the STAR test. And you'll see some examples of it. The sentence revision and editing, I'm going to handle that in significantly more depth in the second video that I'm going to do. But that is it's not the same way they handle editing on the STAR. It's a little bit different. So you'll get to see the format of those questions if you watch the second video. Okay. So these are some of the skills. I've gone through the sample questions. I've taken the beta test of the TSI 2.0, and these seem to be the areas that some of them get directly covered, like they explicitly ask about those skills, and some of them are a little bit more, if they're familiar with those concepts, then they have a better chance of picking the best revisions. So if you're really crunched for time and you're like, look, I do not have time to do everything on this list, I would definitely focus on the top 5 that I have here. Comma, splice, and fuse sentences, dangling modifiers, proper pronoun usage, avoiding sentence fragments, and the diction. These 3 I think are great to cover. I think would really help them, especially with other tests like the PSAT and the SAT and ACT. But if you're short on time, consider incorporating these into your tier 1 instruction in your classroom, because I think knowing these can just overall help the students. And coordination and subordination, it's not a directly tested skill. Let me move this so you can see what that says. It is not a directly tested skill, but I do include a slideshow on that, because I feel like if students start to understand what it means to coordinate ideas and subordinate ideas, it's a good foundation for them to analyze the sentence revision options. So a lot of times this is just a little, and I'll talk about this probably a little bit more, when they ask for a sentence revision, it's often the choice that's usually the correct choice is the one where they take one of the clauses and they subordinate it, rather than the choice where the two, where they're coordinated and they're joined by like a fanboy. I don't know that I can say that 100% of the time that's true, but my thinking with this, and this might be something great to put into your regular English classroom, working on understanding that concept does help them make better choices in the revision area. But is that a directly tested skill on the SAT? No, it's more of a foundational skill that helps you build other skills. The same thing, the sample questions on the editing part didn't include active and passive voice or parallelism. I have a feeling that they could still turn up, because those are skills that college boards always really liked in the past. But again, if you feel like you're doing just a quick TSI and you don't really have time to get into those, you don't have to. And when they do parallelism, it's usually pretty simple. It's not real complicated. It's just matching ing structures. The other thing is these all link to slideshows. I probably should have said that before, but these all link to slideshows that cover this skill, that if you click on any of these in the slideshow, which is included in the Canvas classroom, If you click on any of these, it'll force you to make a copy of it. So you don't have to worry about altering it or anything. Once you make a copy of it, it's yours. It can be on your Google Drive. And then you can use these as you see fit. So I'll be honest with you, when I started my student teaching, it was my student teaching, and I had to teach parallelism, and I just didn't know what it was. Like, I know that maybe if you're an English teacher, maybe you're shocked and you're clutching your chest that a teacher would get through college and not really know what parallelism is. But I didn't. I mean, I'm sure I practiced it in my writing. I'm sure when I took standardized tests, I hopefully picked the choice that was parallel, but I hadn't heard it called parallel structure or parallelism. So you may be seeing things and you're not exactly sure what that means. And that's okay. Like, you can't know everything. And then you'll look at it and you'll say, oh, that's what they're talking about. So these are the skills. This can be for your students. It can also be for you if you feel like you need a refresher on any of these areas. Okay. So we're going to talk specifically about the essay revision questions. And the essay revision questions are questions 16 through 19 on the TSI. So they'll finish with the reading and then we'll get the essay revision question, and that's where it's going to be placed. Let me show you what there are 4 questions based on a draft that could easily be improved. So that's kind of like a fake student draft. And then the sentences in the draft are numbered for easy reference. And then it's pretty similar, as I mentioned a little bit before, to the first, I think it's 9 questions. There'll be an essay with 5 questions and an essay with 4 questions. It's very similar to that. There's just only 4 questions on the TSI. So let me show you what that looks like. And this is from a passage that's on the Canvas course. And that is the name of the specific name of that is called Passage Questions Save the Elephants. So I want you to look at the format. Obviously, it doesn't look exactly like College Board. I don't have access to their fonts and their layout. I try as much as I can to make it as similar to that as possible. So you get an essay. It's not terribly long. And then each of the sentences is numbered so that they can ask easily about the sentences. And then you'll get the question. And the one thing to know is that on the TSI, the passage always remains, but the question changes. So they don't get to go back to the questions. And that's something I talk about on previous videos, but you always have to teach students, like, once you give the answer, you don't get to go back to it. It's kind of a weird quirk, I guess, of the TSI. But this question, so if you can visualize it, this will always be there on these 16 through 19, and this will change. So they'll, click their answer, submit it, and then the question will change. So I didn't mean to move that, but that's how the experience of taking the TSI is. Okay, so the types of questions, after pouring through the samples that they had available, it kind of boiled down to these 5 types of questions or skills. They typically ask about adding a transitional word or phrase. They'll ask about which of the following is the best revision for sentence number 5, sentence number 11. Combining sentences, what is the best way to combine these 2 sentences, like sentence 9 and 10? And they'll usually reproduce it for the students. Adding a sentence, they'll give a sentence that's not in the essay, and they'll say where would be the best place in the essay to add this, and then they'll say which of the following sentences could be deleted without losing meaning or fluidity, or whatever the term of the question is. So these are the 5 questions. So you can just have them practice these 5 types of questions. So I'm just going to go through those types of questions, and then the video will be over. And remember, there will be a part 2, which will talk about the editing questions. Okay, so most of the questions that you're going to see that I'm going to show you samples of, and I'm actually going to go ahead and send myself away because I think I'm going to be in the way. So most of the questions you'll see are from this passage called Save the Elephants, but there's one that, because that only has 4 questions, for the 5th question, I pulled it from a different sample. Okay, so question number 1, Save the Elephants. Okay, and this is adding transitional words or phrases. And if you have a student who's fairly comfortable with the English language, this is probably not going to be one of the harder questions for them. The students that I think about who might struggle with this are going to be students who are learning English as a second language, because sometimes those nuances of transitional phrases can be a bit difficult. So if you have students who are struggling with this skill, and it depends on who you're working with, maybe you don't, maybe this will be an easy kind of a gimme question for them. But if it's not, then consider teaching them to chunk transitional phrases into categories. So, for example, these transitional phrases are typically used when you have relationships that are contrasting, like a word like however, or on the other hand, or um, uh, regardless. One of those types of words, if you can kind of teach them that when you're trying to build a relationship that is contrasting ideas. Maybe you have ideas of addition, like for example, or additionally. So I have a couple resources linked in the slideshow that does it for you. They're not resources I created, they're resources that I found online. One of the suggestions I'd make, especially if you're working with a student who's struggling with this skill, is some of those lists can be very daunting. They can be super long. Actually, let's look at one real quick. Um, okay, so this is from the University of North Carolina, and they have it chunked into, this is not too bad, but they have it chunked into different, see, similarity, exception or contrast, sequence or order. So my suggestion would be that you make the list a bit shorter as they get comfortable with it. And I would go with the big ones. I wouldn't go with some of the ones that maybe are a little more, that they're less like notwithstanding, I'll use that as an example. I don't typically see that one on tests. I mean, I could be wrong, like you never know with testing. But so I might go through and I might pick out the ones that I think are likely to appear on the test. And so going back to the slideshow, there's an additional resource here. I don't remember what that is. Oh, this is kind of a handout. But again, I think this has a little bit of a practice with it. If you're wanting to do practice, that's a pretty good resource. I do think sometimes these lists can be kind of overwhelming. So if you're working with kind of advanced level students that can handle looking at a resource like this, then by all means use it exactly as is. If you're working with struggling students, you probably already know this. You want to start with a little bit more baby steps. Okay, so let's take a look at a sample question. So what I have done, the way that I've designed this is if you're sitting there saying, that's really small, I'm having a hard time seeing that, I'm going to make the question a little bit bigger for you. So this is what you get. And the purpose of this isn't for you to quiz yourself. The purpose for this is just to see the types of questions. You can go onto the Canvas course and practice this one yourself and see how you would answer the questions. But this is what the sentence might look like, or this is what the question might look like. Which of the following should be added to the beginning of sentence 4? So of course, you know, as good test takers and as good English, you're all good English students. I mean, you're English teachers, so of course you would be good English students. You know to look at the context, you know to look at the sentence before to help bridge into this sentence. Sometimes you look at even before sentence 3, and then you would be able to come up with the right answer. But again, my purpose isn't to quiz you here, and this is not a slideshow intended for students. This is a slideshow intended for you to understand the test. But if you're like, I want to be able to read the passage and answer the question, by all means, go into the Canvas course and practice it. And I'll show you at the end where you can find these resources. Okay. The second type of question that you might see the students get is a possible revision, and this is going to be very familiar to them from taking STAR test. They could be revising ambiguous pronoun reference, like if the pronoun is they and there's no antecedent for it, it just seems kind of random. Pronoun agreement, comma splice errors, parallelism. So this is an example, again, what this question would look like. They typically reproduce the sentence, so the student doesn't need to look back up at the passage. And this is one of those where they probably don't. Usually when they reproduce it, they don't think the student needs to look back at the passage. They can if they think it's helpful, but it's probably not going to be. So one of the things I notice is this is a place where in the response, as in, this one is specifically testing pronoun reference, like they did not want to kill the young elephants, like they is not referenced. So actually it would help to look up at sentence 8, but they did not want to kill the young elephants. So that's the problem here. And a really smart test taker will see that this is the only one that changes it, and that might clue them into this one. But with this one, it is a pronoun reference. I've also seen where they're testing comma splice skills, where they have a comma splice error in the sentence, and they're trying to see if the students can fix that. So that is that type of question. The third type of question that we might see is the best way to combine. I see this one a lot on the test. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. This is where I think the coordination and subordination piece of it comes in. If the students understand the relationship between sentence clauses, they're going to do a better job of combining sentences, I would maintain. So, for example, one of the distractor choices, this is also where comma splice, because I usually see as a distractor choice, they're always going to put a comma splice error. So if they have two sentences that need to be combined, sometimes they'll just slap a comma between them in the distractor choice. And that's why it's a good idea to talk about comma splice errors in test prep. Usually one of the distractor choices will be like wordy and awkward. It's not technically wrong, but it's just very, it sort of adds words it doesn't need to. And sometimes students are attracted to that because they're kind of taught longer is better. They're not taught that. They somehow get that idea that longer is better. If this is a skill you want to specifically work on, I would recommend coordination and subordination. And if you're not sure what that means, you can check out the slideshow that is linked. And that's something that I think if you work on that in your regular English class, and if we start to build that as departments across the district, then students will understand that language. They'll be like, oh, this one's better because it takes one idea and it makes it a subordinate idea. Okay. So here's an example of a question. You can see the elephants went into killing spree. The elephants, you can see as strong writers, as strong readers, that you don't need to be starting the same sentence with the same subject. So then they'll give you different options. And I will point out that in choice B, it's a comma splice. And this one, I think by going on a killing spree, the elephants, awkward wording. So this last one is the correct choice. I don't want to ruin it if you want to quiz yourself. But if you look at choices 1 and 3, they're just awkwardly worded. That's a comma splice error. This is the best. It's the tightest, most concise wording. And if you're in a hurry with the students, always tell them to pick the most concise wording. That's usually going to be the correct choice. Okay, 2 more types of sentences. Deleting a sentence. I personally think this is a kind of an easy question, because I think if the passage starts to veer off in the wrong direction, add random facts, I think it's pretty easy to know that that's the sentence that comes out. But you never know with students. They might be like, but that was really interesting. I'd keep it in there. So, you just have to teach them, you just have to work with them on understanding what the author's purpose is and what they're trying to get across. And so it provides, so the correct choice, and in other words, by correct choice, meaning the one you need to get rid of, usually does provide distracting information, extra information that is not really on topic. So they really need to look at that sentence in the context of the entire passage, reading a few sentences before and after, reading the whole paragraph that it's in, and asking yourself what sentence represents what sentence represents or presents unnecessary information. So let's take a look at a sample of that. Okay, which of the following sentences could be deleted? And this is the question just a little bit bigger if you're not able to see the smaller version on your device. So what you would do, again, and this is not supposed to test you. This is more for just presentation. You would go back and read these sentences in the context that they're in and be like, well, yeah, that one just seems like it has extra information the reader doesn't need. The 5th type of question is adding a sentence. And this, I'm actually going to use a different passage than the Save the Elephants passage, because I didn't have a 5th question in the elephants passage. They all only have 4, because that's what the kids are going to see on the test. So there's going to be a sentence that's not already in the passage that they're proposing needs to be added or could be added into the passage. And the job of the test taker is to determine where that passage should go. So they need to reread the proposed choices. If they're saying it needs to go before sentence 6, they need to read the sentences. So let me show you. Okay. So you would get this sentence and you would determine where that would need to go, right? So if you're thinking it might fit here, like if you're trying this out as a test taker, you would need to kind of look at what comes before and what comes after. And you would say, yeah, that's a good fit, or no, that seems like it wouldn't fit there. It seems like it doesn't flow. It doesn't have fluidity. And so that's a trial and error until you come to the one where you think it really makes the most sense. So it's a lot of these questions are about context. It's about looking what's around. So the questions where you're deleting and the questions where you're adding, that's testing the skill of your ability or as a test taker to go back and see if there's like if it makes sense where it's placed. So that is the fifth type of question that I typically see. Okay, so this is going to be the subject of the second video. But before I stop this video, I'm just going to take a look at where you can find these on the Canvas course. So the Canvas course, let me make this a little bit smaller so you can see more on the screen. Okay, the Canvas course is set up by modules. And so if you look at the writing multiple choice practice, this is what we're talking about, the essay practice questions. And I have 4 there for you to work with your students. There's actually a couple more in the question bank, and there's a separate video on the question bank that you can take a look at. But these are all set, all ready to go for you to assign to students, for you to practice with yourself, for you to, maybe modify and make your own. But they're different passages that you can use. So those are the 4 that I have created for you. You can do a little bit of your own creation. Other places where you can find passage questions if you just want more. This right here is a quiz that has the whole package from College Board. And that is something that's not mine. That is the entire thing. That is all 15 questions. The essay revision that we just talked about and the editing questions, which are going to be discussed in part 2. So this is that whole packet. So this will have a different essay revision question in it. Let me see. I don't remember which one this is. So you can always go to preview, and you can always go to preview on any of these and take the quiz yourself. And then you can see. So this one is the what happens to our brains when we read. That's actually different than the one I think I was just looking at. That other one, I think that was a different, they're both about brains. But they're 2 different ones on brains. So this one is from the College Board. So when you see anything that's labeled as College Board, know that it's not something that I created. And I want to be very upfront about that. I don't want to take credit for other people's work. One more thing I want to mention before I end this video is knowing that not everybody wants to use Canvas. Maybe you want to use paper. So what I have done, and I've done this with all of them, is I've actually linked, these are 2 different practice packets. So if you would prefer to use paper, I got you, okay? And I even have that on, this is not the stuff I created. So all I did was add a link. That's not really heroic. But what I did do on the ones that I've created, the practices that are mine, is I've also linked you to the question bank for that in Google Docs. And it forces you to make a copy. So it's yours. You can do what you want with it. If you don't like the way I wrote a question, you can change it. And you'll see here that the question, so if you wanted to go and use paper and with the students, that's fine. If you're going to do that, I do want to remind you that they are going to have to take it on the computer. So everything is here on paper. If you're like, I can't deal with this Canvas course, I feel like the kids are on the computer too much. I did add that feature to the course where you can download kind of a paper copy of most of what's in the question bank. I don't think it's every single thing that's in the question bank, but it's most. It's enough to get through several TSI sessions. And I did that for everything. And I'm going to add this because this is not in the reading videos, because this was something I just added recently. So the literary passage practice. If you want this, I think I have 11 of these. I have a lot of literary passage. Then you would click on this, make your copy, and okay. Then you would have all of them with the answers, with the explanations. So I wanted to make this course something that people felt like they could use, even if they're not really feeling like using Canvas, or maybe it doesn't work for your intervention. Maybe you're going to have kids who don't bring their computers. I wanted to make it functional for everybody. So as always, if you have any feedback on the Canvas course, I would thoroughly appreciate you reaching out to me and telling me what you still need or what doesn't make sense. Um, so with that, and if you're still wanting more help navigating the Canvas course, there's a video called Features of the Canvas course where you can see exactly what's involved in it. And if you want to create your own quizzes, I've created some for you, but if you're like, oh, I need more, or I want to have a little bit more autonomy, that this explains how you can use the question banks to create your own quizzes. So I believe that is it. As I said, there's going to be a part 2 where we talk about the questions 20 through 30. So if you want some help with those editing questions, make sure that you click on that video and watch that. Thank you as always, and have a great day, and reach out if you have any questions.